This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Oh, I see that you took my advice from the last video and you bought yourself a Blackmagic Pocket 6K. Yeah, get that nice epic B-roll. But how are you going to edit that footage? What are you going to show me? Are you going to show me a maxed out MacBook Pro 16-inch? But now you're not going to have any money for lights. Maybe you should try this instead. So if you watched my last video, we talked about the Blackmagic Pocket 6K and why it's the camera that I recommend to filmmakers that are starting to take cinematography more serious. But now you've got your Blackmagic Pocket 6K, you're ready to shoot some stuff, but then how are you going to edit it? Well, it just happened to be that my wife needed a new laptop, so I decided to go to Best Buy and pick up a new MacBook Air with the M1 processor. And I did this because I've already seen some videos online talking about how powerful this M1 processor is, even in this base model MacBook Air. So this is just the MacBook Air with 7 cores and 8 gigabytes of RAM, and a 256 gig hard drive. I picked it up for $999. And I wanted to see if it could actually handle editing this 6K raw footage that's coming out of this camera, and if it could be a potential beginner laptop for someone that's starting to take cinematography more serious. So I'm not gonna go through the process of completely stress testing the computer. There's plenty of other videos on YouTube already talking about that. I just wanna see if this would work with my workflow, work with my Blackmagic Pocket 6K workflow. Then I also wanna see if it can handle the H.265 footage coming out of my X-T3. And then just to see what it can really do, I'm going to take some clips from the Area Mira that I recently shot, and I've shot those in ProRes 444, and we're gonna see if those can actually edit on this computer as well. So I think the obvious limitation is going to be the 8 gigabytes of RAM when using DaVinci Resolve as our editing platform of choice, and we're going to be using that because it does come free with the Blackmagic Pocket, and this is the camera that I recommend to get for that reason, is because you're gonna get free editing software, free professional studio editing software with this camera. And DaVinci Resolve tends to use quite a bit of RAM and a lot of GPU memory to do its processing, which is a little bit different, I believe, than like what Final Cut Pro. That's a more processor heavy program, so they're gonna have different results when doing this. So I've already pre-installed DaVinci Resolve on here and played with some clips a little bit, but let's just look at this in real time and see what it can do. So I put some footage on this computer and I put it right directly onto the SSD that's included with the computer, because that's probably going to be the most efficient way of testing this out. So we decided to shoot this with the Q5 quality on the Pocket, which is not the highest bitrate codec that you can get from the Pocket, but it's the only codec that I actually use on it. Now, if I was doing a really high-end job with the Pocket for some reason, then maybe I would use that Q0 and get as much bitrate as I possibly could. Maybe if I was filming like a green screen or something like that and I just needed that extra quality. But I've found that the Q5 on this is totally usable in every situation for me so far, and I have zero complaints about that, and that's going to be more efficient to edit with most likely, so that's what we're going to use here today. Because like I said, we're not trying to just completely stress test the computer. We just want to see if you could use this computer. You know, you've saved some money by getting the Pocket 6K, not getting like something like an A7S III, and so now you have a little bit extra money left over to get a computer to edit with. This would be the cheapest one to get in the Apple lineup. And that way you could have even more money left over to get some lights to help light your videos too. We're talking about the best bang for the buck here. So I'm going to grab all these clips and throw them onto the timeline. Like I said, it's only 6 gigs, so technically this shouldn't fill up our RAM, but once we start adding color grades and stuff like that, let's see what it does. Of course, you'll probably shoot more than 6 gigs on a project, and we will throw some more footage in here to see how that works as well. So just right away, let's just go full screen and see how it plays back the footage. So it's a little choppy getting going here, which is pretty common with DaVinci Resolve anyways. It needs a second to kind of render some of that stuff in the background before it will play smoothly. Let's see, it's not totally hitting 24 frames per second the whole time. So when I used this before, it ran a little bit smoother than this, and I think it's probably because we're running that QuickTime player in the background now, which you wouldn't be doing when you're editing. Okay, so it did start to stutter right when I started here, but it's not because of the screen recording. It was actually because I was editing in a 4K timeline, and I almost always edit in a 1080p timeline and then switch it to 4K just before I export. So this is my standard workflow. Now that we're back in a 1080p timeline, everything is playing back completely smooth with no issues. And like I said before, with DaVinci, once you hit play, it takes a second to get things going, but once it's going, everything should be playing back smooth. I just happen to be smoking some ribs this day, so that's why we use the ribs as our B-roll subject. Right, so it's slowly working. We have got color on there. You know, it takes a second to play back, but once it's playing, it's good to go. So this is my standard workflow, and so far this $1,000 computer is keeping up. Now let's add a couple of text files on here and some music into it and just see if it bogs down the system even more. So we've got some sample text here. So when I add a text file like this, sometimes it doesn't always play back because it takes a second to render, but let's see, it's kind of rendering itself out right now. Let's see how it plays back. Stuttering quite a bit. Let's see now that we've got it rendered here. Oh, there we go. Now that it's rendered out, it seems to be playing back just fine. So based on talking with some other people that have some M1 machines, maybe getting the 16 gigabytes of RAM, spending that extra $200, I believe it is, would take this computer a little bit further, whereas right now we only have the 8 gigabytes of RAM. It seems that I could probably edit an entire video with this right now with not many issues for the cost. So let's hop on the music bed and grab a quick song to throw in there as well. Seems a little intense for the meat shot, but let's do it anyways. Get a full wave file here. So let's talk about a couple pros and cons of this computer before we move on with that. First off, it does only have 2 USB-C ports on this computer and 1 headphone jack, which the headphone jack I would say is a plus, but it only has 2 USB-C ports, so you will need a dongle if you're gonna be plugging in multiple hard drives and plugging it in to charge it at the same time. But it seems that the battery life on this is really nice so far. That M1 chip must be really efficient, and that's definitely a plus when using these newer M1 chip computers. So we're gonna throw in some music here. Everything seems to be playing back just fine. Maybe I'll throw some stabilization on a clip just to see how that goes. So let's take this clip, you know, like a traditional 4-second clip here, and we'll stabilize that. This should go fairly fast. I think on my computer it probably takes around, I don't know, 5 to 10 seconds to stabilize a clip. So let's take this, pop in here and stabilize that. And we're done. I wish that was a little bit faster on the stabilization. But something you could definitely live with. Let's see how it plays. Not amazing. So that stabilization on that clip is definitely bogging it down. Oh, but when we're back in playback here, it seems to be working fine. And I do have screen recording still rolling in the background. Okay. So I think it's a pretty good test with the Blackmagic RAW, the B-RAW coming out of the Pocket 6K. But now let's throw some other footage in it and see how it handles that. I'm just gonna plug in a SanDisk SSD, which should be very fast going to the USB-C port. This is a super fast drive. Okay, I had to quickly install the studio version of DaVinci Resolve, but now we are back up and running. That way we can look at this H.265 footage. Okay, so now that I have DaVinci Resolve up and running, the studio version, I'm going to throw some H.265 footage from the Fuji X-T3 and some Quad 4 ProRes footage from the Area Mira, which will be a really high bitrate. I'm going to throw that into the timeline and see how those handle. So you got the X-T3 footage on here. I have added a ARRIREC 709 LUT to it, and it's playing back immediately. Actually, let's go over here and check the stabilized clip from the B-RAW. Yeah, it's still kind of playing back slower. Okay, so H.265, No problems at all. And then let's go to this area mirror clip, which I've also thrown Rec 709 on, and full screen it. Playback. Seems to be running smooth, and we're running at 24 frames per second. No problems. All right, so this is an 8-minute timeline. If we wanted to export this 8-minute and 34-second timeline, let's see how long it takes to export it. Let's switch the settings over to 4K for the export, Ultra HD, 24 frames per second. We're gonna call it the export test. And we're just gonna put it right on the desktop. So let's see if this will render back in real time, or if it's gonna take longer than 8 minutes and 34 seconds, or maybe it'll be even faster. So we have a ProRes clip from the area mirror on here. We've got a H.265 footage from the Fuji X-T3, and then we have 6 gigabytes of B-RAW footage from the Pocket 6K, which is 6K footage. All right, let's start the render here. Its estimated time is pretty high. We have one stabilized clip on there. They're all color graded, and I'm just going to hit the stopwatch now just to see how fast it goes. It's estimating around 21 minutes to export this 8-minute timeline. And while we're waiting for this to render, let's talk about today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Now, Squarespace is an all-in platform to present your work online. Now, once you get your Pocket 6K and a new MacBook Air and you start making some projects, you can use Squarespace to present that online. You can start by making a portfolio with one of their pre-existing templates, or you can just build your website from scratch using the tools that are already integrated into Squarespace. You can basically change the design however you want. There are plenty of different font options, colors, you can change the width of the content. There's just a lot of ways to customize the website yourself. And this isn't just meant for desktop, it'll also reformat your pages for tablets and also mobile devices. Now, of course, you can embed videos on the website, and then you can rearrange them however you want using the video blocks tool on the site. So if you're anything like me and you need a place to present your work online, we'll just build it with Squarespace. Click the link in the description to get 10% off. And thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. So we're about 8 minutes into the export, and it just kicked over to the H.265 footage from the Fuji X-T3. Up until that point, it was rendering the B-RAW out of the Pocket 6K pretty slow, definitely not in real time. But now that we've hit that Fuji footage, it is exporting extremely fast. The remaining time went down really, really far, and so it seems to be really just cutting through that H.265 footage. It seems to be rendering at about 48 frames per second on a 24 frames per second timeline, so that's about double the speed of the actual footage. Now we're into the Quad 4 ProRes files, and it seems to be rendering those at about 15 frames per second, so definitely not real time. So obviously the higher the bitrate the codec is, the more it's going to slow down this base model MacBook Air. All right, and we just finished an 8-minute and 34-second video in about 11 minutes. So not too bad. Different codecs in there are obviously going to slow it down or speed it up. It seems that the H.265 codec did the best, so keep that in mind. Maybe you're looking to get a different camera than the Pocket 6K, maybe something like the Panasonic S5 or something of that nature, or maybe a Fuji X-T3. Those are going to handle much better on this computer. Now, I'm not going to do a side-by-side comparison with my MacBook Pro because I don't feel like that's really a fair comparison. We're talking about a totally different price bracket and different style of computer. I just wanted to look at the most inexpensive Apple laptop with these new M1 processors and see how it handled the footage that I would throw out in my normal day-to-day workflow. I thought this might be helpful for someone else out there that's looking to purchase a new computer for their filmmaking kit. So like I said before, this is the base model MacBook Air with 8 gigabytes of RAM and a 256 gig hard drive. So if you have a little bit of extra cash, you might want to consider the MacBook Pro 13-inch versus MacBook Air with the M1 processor, because for about $300 more, you do get an 8-core processor rather than the 7-core processor. And I believe there's a fan in that laptop, which could help you with your render times because it could cool down that processor even more. And the reason I'm recommending the cheapest laptop is just so you could have more money to spend on lights and on your content, which means a little bit more than how fast you can edit. And as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you loved it, subscribe to the channel. Until next time, guys, I'm Spencer Sakurai. See ya.